Part 1. Rotten from the start. The first thing folks noticed when they met a cowboy wasn't the hat, the boots, or the gun. It was the teeth, or rather, the lack of them. Cowboys didn't flash shiny grins. Most of them had mouths full of gaps, blackened stumps, or teeth so crooked they looked like old barn nails. And that wasn't some quirky aesthetic, that was survival. Because back in the Wild West, teeth didn't just fall out, they gave up. Start with the basics. Hygiene. There wasn't any. Toothbrushes, rare. Toothpaste, a luxury. Most cowboys cleaned their teeth, if they even bothered, with chewed twigs, bits of cloth, or the edge of a dirty bandana. And that was on a good day. More often, they just let things rot. There were no dentists out on the prairie, no offices, no reclining chairs or anesthetic. If a tooth ached, it didn't get filled, it got yanked, and if there was no one around to do the yanking, the cowboy did it himself, with a knife, or pliers, or the backside of a revolver. Rot set in fast. Imagine weeks on the trail eating salted beef, hardtack, and beans cooked in old bacon grease. No vegetables, no vitamins, just dry food, hot sun, and grit between your molars. Scurvy, that sailor's disease, found its way inland. Gums bled, teeth loosened, and infections spread. The worst part, cowboys didn't even flinch. A rotting tooth was just another part of the job, like saddle sores or sunburn. They'd crack jokes while digging into their jaw with a rusty nail, because pain to them meant they were still alive. Then came tobacco. Chewing tobacco was practically a food group on the frontier. Almost every cowboy kept a plug tucked in his cheek. It calmed the nerves, it kept the flies away. It gave you something to do on long rides, but it also turned your gums to mush. The mix of tobacco juice, dirt, and poor diet acted like acid on enamel. Teeth melted away like butter in the sun. You'd see cowboys spitting brown streams into the fire, laughing as another molar wobbled loose. Some even saw tooth loss as a rite of passage. First you break a horse, then you lose a tooth. That's how you knew you were tough. Mornings on the trail started with a spit, not a smile. A wad of chewed tobacco landed near the fire. Someone passed the tin around. No one brushed, no one rinsed. You just woke up, put something between your teeth, and rode off until sundown. By the time night fell, your jaw might already be throbbing. Cowboys didn't complain. They didn't go to town for a checkup. They grabbed a bottle of whiskey, bit down on a stick, and handled business the cowboy way, alone, with a grimace and a spit. And let's not forget the makeshift remedies. Some believed rubbing salt into the gums could draw out the poison. Others stuck matchsticks between their teeth to keep them straight. One man swore by a mix of gunpowder and creek water to rinse the mouth, said it killed the germs. What it actually did was strip the skin off his tongue. But that was life in the West. Your teeth weren't just tools, they were time bombs. And when one went bad, it could take your whole jaw with it. It wasn't uncommon to see a cowboy with one cheek permanently swollen, speaking from one side of his mouth like a drunk poet. Abscesses festered, jaws cracked. Some men couldn't eat without pain, so they drank their meals, beans mashed into paste, so thin it was basically broth. Sometimes they just drank whiskey and called it supper. And yet they kept going, because out there, on the range, nobody cared if your smile was crooked. What mattered was if you could rope a steer, ride a bronc, or shoot straight when the dust kicked up. Behind every grizzled cowboy in a sepia-toned photograph was a mouth that had suffered quietly. Some had wooden teeth carved from pine, others just gummed their jerky like old dogs, and some carried the loose tooth in their pocket, a souvenir from a life spent riding the edge. That was just the beginning, because the worst was yet to come when the pain didn't stop, and the jaw swelled, and the infection started crawling toward the brain. Part 2. If you rode the trail long enough, your smile told a story, not of charm, but of battles lost in your own mouth. Cowboys didn't lose their teeth in bar brawls or shootouts as often as you'd think. Most of the time, their worst enemy was slow, silent, and always with them, rot. Toothbrushes were rare as angels on the prairie. Baking soda was a luxury, and toothpaste, that belonged to the East Coast dandies, not men who spit tobacco more often than they spoke. The average cowboy's dental hygiene was something between non-existent and experimental. Some rubbed coarse salt on their gums. Others chewed on sagebrush or dry twigs, hoping friction would clean where soap wouldn't go. But mostly they just didn't bother. The real killer wasn't just poor hygiene. It was what they constantly stuffed in their mouths: tobacco. Whether it was chewing tobacco or twist rolls, cowboys were rarely seen without a bulge in their cheek, spit-stained. Shirts and brown rivulets running down their beards were part of the uniform. That black sludge, a toxic cocktail of tar, acids, and whatever chemicals tobacco picked up during drying and rolling. After a few years, even the youngest wranglers began to notice their teeth turning color. First yellow, then brown, then black. Pain would set. In necks, not the kind you wince through, the kind that wakes you up at night, makes your eyes water from the inside. Swollen jaws, infected gums, loose molars. On the trail, there were no dentists. There was only you. A rusty knife, maybe a pair of pliers, and a lot of screaming when the pain got too much. Cowboys took matters into their own bloodied hands. Tooth extraction became a form of frontier surgery. A buddy might hold you down, or you'd bite on leather and yank like your life depended on it. Because sometimes it did. A rotting tooth wasn't just agony. It could become lethal if the infection spread to your bloodstream. They didn't call it sepsis back then. They just said the fever got him. A man would go from tough as nails to shaking in his saddle, face swollen like a kicked pumpkin, muttering nonsense before he stopped breathing. One infected tooth, that was all it took. And the tools, forget sanitized anything. Pliers came from the same box that fixed horseshoes. Knives were heated over open flame. If you were lucky. Most didn't bother. The thought was, if the tooth's already dead, what's a little more rot? Cowboys would pry, twist, yank, and sometimes pull out more than they bargained for. Pieces of jaw, chunks of gum, blood everywhere. And if it broke halfway through, they had to go back in. Some cowboys tried to numb the pain with whiskey. Others bit down on bullets, literally. Lead wasn't healthy, but neither was the alternative. And then there were the legends, the tough as leather. Loners who pulled out their own molars with a bootless and a nail, tie one end to the tooth, the other to the bunkhouse post, slam the door, hope it works. If it didn't, scream into the dirt and try again. Fake teeth not really an option. The lucky few might get a wooden peg jammed in there. Others just got used to gumming their beans and jerky. A cowboy with no teeth wasn't rare. It was expected. By the age of 30, many were missing half their set. By 40, they had smiles like cracked tombstones, and yet it wasn't a cause for shame. On the contrary, it was almost a badge of honor. A toothless cowboy had lived through pain you couldn't imagine. He'd slept under open skies, chewed nails and grit, stared down snakes and outlaws, and won. If his teeth didn't survive, well, maybe they weren't tough enough to ride with him in the first place. But there were consequences. With no teeth and constant gum pain, many switched to soft food. Beans soaked in bacon grease, bread if they had it, and more tobacco, since chewing didn't require molars. It was a vicious cycle. The same habit that ruined their teeth became the only thing they could still enjoy with no teeth left. Even campfire laughter had a rattle to it. When someone made a joke, you'd see gaps, rows of empty sockets where teeth once lived, and still they'd cackle like coyotes. Because in the Wild West, pain was part of the deal. You laughed anyway, or you didn't last long. Part 3. The Black Rot and the Bottle Opener. By the time a cowboy reached 30, his mouth often resembled a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. Teeth broken, blackened, and half-rotted, gums inflamed, breath so foul it could wake a buzzard. And through all that, they still smiled, or at least tried to. They had no dentists, no clean water, no toothbrushes, a stick chewed into bristles or a rag dipped in ashes. That was about as close to oral hygiene as a cowboy got. Floormid, unheard of. Antiseptic, that was the burn of cheap whiskey, poured into an open socket and screamed through clenched fists. One of the cruelest culprits was what they called black rot, a mix of untreated cavities, tobacco decay, and infected gums that ate through the mouth like termites in timber. Teeth would wiggle loose, pus would leak beneath molars, Some cowboys spoke with a constant slur, not from drink, but from pain swelling their jaws. But you worked through it. The cattle didn't care if your teeth were falling out. You still had to ride. When the pain got unbearable, cowboys didn't pray. They reached for pliers, and not just any pliers, anything metal that could grip and pull. A rusty knife, a fence tool. Some used the butt of a revolver to knock a tooth clean out. Others, in moments of whiskey-fueled courage, yanked a molar. By tying it to a saddle horn and spooking the horse, that wasn't legend. That was Tuesday. One story passed around campfires told of a cowboy named Hollow Pete. They said Pete lost all his top teeth in one night, not from a brawl, but from cleaning out the bad ones with a cold branding hook. He'd heat it red hot, shove it in, and press until the rot sizzled. He didn't scream, but the other men left the fire and couldn't eat for days. Prairie medicine was cruel but quick. And let's not forget tobacco, chewing it, that is. Cowboys loved their plug tobacco. It gave them a little energy, a break from the monotony, and something to chew when beans ran out. But the price? Constant jaw inflammation, ulcers, and slow destruction of the inner mouth. They didn't care. It dulled the hunger, numbed the nerves, and if your teeth loosened or your lip bled, you spit it out and took another bite. That brown stain on there. Shirts, not always dirt. Sometimes tobacco juice mixed with blood, wiped off before a poker hand. At night, the camp stank of decay. One cowboy whittled a false tooth from walnut bark. Another kept an old boot nail wrapped in leather. His emergency puller. You didn't ask questions. You just knew that if he got quiet and his jaw twitched, he was heading for the dark side of camp, where only coyotes and pain waited. Yet, oddly, there was pride in surviving it. Cowboys would flash their gaps like medals. A lost tooth meant you'd been through it. A mouthful of air meant you'd won. In a world where nothing came easy. Not food, not shelter, not sleep. Pain was proof you were alive. And if it took a pulled tooth to feel it, so be it. They didn't floss. They didn't rinse. They didn't beg. They spit. And they smiled crooked when they did. Part 4. The price of a smile in the Wild West. There was a saying whispered between campfires. If you can chew, you're lucky. If you can smile, you're lying. Cowboy teeth weren't just bad. They were practically legendary in their decay. And the worst part, it wasn't just from what they ate. It was from what they couldn't stop doing. Sugar was rare. But when it showed up, in the form of canned peaches or molasses, cowboys devoured it like gold dust. They didn't know or care that it clung to their teeth and fed the rot already burrowed in deep. Combine that with dust storms, chewing on leather straps, and weeks without washing, and you had the perfect recipe for oral disaster. But there was another killer hiding behind their smiles. Poor nutrition. Most cowboys lived on beans, biscuits, and whatever meat didn't spoil by sunset. There were no vitamins, no fresh greens, no milk unless you happened to steal it from a passing homestead. The result? Gums shriveled like dry leather, and teeth loosened from scurvy, not just disease, but starvation in slow motion. Some men looked 20 years older than they were. Their faces sunken, mouths collapsed inward, giving them a permanent sneer. It wasn't attitude. It was anatomy. When the molars went, the cheeks followed. Yet somehow, vanity still lived out there on the trail. A few cowboys carved false teeth from animal bone. Others filed their remaining teeth into even shapes, not for looks, but to stop them from cutting into their cheeks while they rode. One man was rumored to have gold fillings. Though nobody could explain where he got them, most assumed he pulled them from someone else. Then there were the tooth men, shady travelers who carried a sack of tools and claimed they could fix what was broken. Sometimes they had actual skills. Most of the time, they had whiskey and pliers. If you had a coin and a strong stomach, they'd pull your tooth right there on a tree stump, slap a rag in your mouth, and move on before you woke up. The pain was a business, and out there, business was good. But here's the twist. Cowboys didn't complain about it much. They'd make jokes, call each other gummy or chompers. They laughed about the man who swallowed his last molar during a fistfight. It was all part of the code. Tough men didn't whine. They chewed what they could and spit out the rest. Or still, when night fell and the cattle quieted, Some cowboys sat by the fire and stared into the flame, tongue probing the empty spaces. In their mouths, remembering what used to be there. A sweet apple, a steak that didn't hurt to bite, a girl back home who once said, "You've got a nice smile." And now, they turned their heads when they laughed. It wasn't shame, it was survival. Because teeth were just another thing the West took from you. Like time, like friends, like softness. And when they were gone, they didn't come back. The lucky ones got old enough to forget how much it used to hurt. The unlucky ones, well, they never stopped hurting. They just stopped talking. So the next time you see an old Western photo, look closely. That cowboy with his mouth shut tight, he's not being stoic. He's hiding the truth. Not all the scars from the frontier were on the outside. And some of the worst ones were left by what you couldn't see. The rot, the rawness, the silent endurance behind every crooked grin. Because in the Wild West, a smile wasn't free. It was earned, one broken tooth at a time.